do you need an LLC to invest in rental properties? We're going to dive into all of this today, why you'd want to do this, why you might not need to do this. And I'll caveat, Mike, before we really dive into it, I'm not a lawyer. Mike is not a lawyer either. This is not legal advice. Consult with your lawyer on actual legal advice. We're two dudes with a podcast trying to answer a question that we get all the time, but this is not to be misconstrued as legal advice. So, Mike, let's kind of just dive into it. I'll start and then we'll just kind of roll with it here. But an LLC, right? An LLC is a limited liability company. So let's start with why you'd want to maybe use an LLC to own your rental properties in. So the big thing is liability protection, right, Mike? So people think that if the Jacob Sandoval LLC owns 123 Main Street, Cleveland, Ohio, that I'm fully protected from all liability. If there's a lawsuit or if something happens at the property, only the Jacob Sandoval LLC is liable for anything that happens, not Jacob Sandoval, the person, right? So the idea with owning rental properties in an LLC is you separate yourself, the individual, and all of your personal assets from your rental property business. And people think by doing that, you are adding a layer of protection, which could be the case, right? Another thing, Mike, people think about, and we get this all the time, people think that for some reason, having an LLC gives you additional tax benefits. Those are kind of like the main ones. Mike, what other things do you kind of think about when people talk about, hey, why would I want to set up an LLC?
Yeah, so you mentioned it, asset protection is one of the main reasons that people do it. Also, it can be complicating when it comes to financing a property for the new investor, understanding that you cannot purchase a property in LLC and then take out conventional financing. You have to buy it in your personal name. There are ways to buy in an LLC, and that's through either commercial financing or DSCR financing or some other avenue. So that's another layer that, complicates it as well, and then plus some people want anonymity as well. Right. So some people do it on purpose for anonymity.
Yeah. So that's a good point as well. Some people will do it for anonymity, so that their name kind of doesn't show up anywhere. What's the saying, rich people, they don't own anything, right? Because they kind of set up all this stuff. But for the purposes of this conversation, Mike, I'll just kind of share my own personal views. I do not use an LLC to own my rental properties. I own my rental properties in my personal name and in my wife's personal name. And I'll kind of just talk through the rationale of why I feel I don't need to have an LLC. So the first thing, and we can dispel this, we had a while back, Mike, we had my CPA, shout out to the CPA dude, come on to the podcast. And he talked about the fact that there are no additional tax benefits of having an LLC. That's just kind of like a complete misconception. Just having an LLC does not grant you additional tax benefits. So if that's the belief that you have, that's just incorrect. You have the same tax benefits whether you own the LLC in your personal name, or whether you own the property in your personal name, or whether you own it through an LLC. The tax benefits are the same. So kind of remove that out the window. But I do want to address the liability piece, Mike, because that is probably the most valid thing with owning an LLC, is that you're theoretically protecting yourself with liability. Here's what I kind of believe. One, adequate insurance is going to be probably in most cases, 99.9% of cases, adequate insurance is going to protect you enough in your rental property business. If there's a slip and fall, obviously read your insurance coverage. If there's a slip and fall and the tenant sues you, that is covered by your insurance, right? That is covered by adequate rental property insurance. And if you get really technical, Mike, if you look at your insurance premium, your insurance provider is going to break down what consists of that premium. For example, if you have, let's just make it up, right? Let's say that my insurance for one of my Cleveland duplexes is like $120 a month. And so that's going to come to an annual amount. They're going to break down what portion of that is actually being driven by potential lawsuits, right? And what portion of that is covering the building, et cetera, things like that. The lawsuits piece, the liability piece that's covering you against a lawsuit is such a small portion of that premium. And what does that tell me, Mike? That tells me that the actual insurance provider is not very concerned with the potential of getting sued. They're not really worried about that. So to me, I'm like, okay, your insurance can protect you against this. Now, that's the first thing that I'll say is that most people don't understand that insurance is good enough if you have a good enough policy. On top of that, too, I don't just have a regular rental property insurance. I have that, but I also have a personal umbrella policy that gives me an additional $2 million of liability that covers my rental properties, that covers my automobiles, that covers everything. So not only do I have insurance on the property itself, I have an umbrella policy that grants me an additional $2 million of liability coverage if something happens at one of my rental properties. So to think that something happening at my rental properties is going to be in excess of more than $2 million of liability, I sleep perfectly fine at night just knowing that I have that. So that's kind of what I want to say, Mike, is that yes, in theory, the LLC can give you liability coverage, but if your insurance covers you enough and you're comfortable enough with that policy, then you really shouldn't stress out about a slip and fall lawsuit.
Agree 100% there. Insurance is key. I also have an umbrella policy like you do. I mean, I've owned rental properties for a long time. And I mean, if you maintain your properties and you have good relationships with your tenants, I don't see a ton of issues in that regard. Now, for those who obviously don't manage their properties, obviously you want to have a good relationship with your property manager. And your property manager should be the one taking, care and responsibility for making sure that your properties are maintained. And that helps avoid problems in the future, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the other. So that's kind of one piece of it, right? I think an insurance policy, potentially an umbrella policy on top of that. If you have multiple rental properties, if you just have one, you're probably going to get a decent amount of liability coverage if you just have one rental property. But if you have 2, 3, 4 rental properties, maybe think about getting a personal umbrella policy to give you additional liability. So that's kind of one piece. Like I don't stress out too much about the potential of getting sued because I do have adequate insurance. Another thing too is a lot of people don't actually go about setting up the LLC the right way. And so what do I mean by that? Well, one, you kind of alluded to this earlier, Mike, but if you buy the property, that is, you're holding title to the property in the name of the LLC, your financing and your insurance also have to be in the name of the LLC. And if you are, Jacob Sandoval LLC, I can't get 30-year fixed rate debt, Mike. I can't get the financing that is afforded to people, individuals. Why? Because banks view lending to businesses, which an LLC is a business, they view lending to a business as a more risky venture than lending to an individual. So what does that mean? That means debt terms, financing terms that are more expensive, that are going to be, maybe a 5-year fix, 7-year fix, 10-year fix at the max with a balloon payment afterwards. So you're not going to get that 30-year fixed rate. And that is the secret power of residential investing, is that 30-year fixed rate debt, right? That locking in that mortgage rate, holding it over the long term. That's the true superpower of investing in residential rental properties. And you just can't do that. Now, what I see a lot of people doing, Mike, and again, not lawyers here, but I view this as a mistake. They'll buy the property in the LLC, but they'll get the financing as an individual. They'll get the insurance as the individual. So what do you have here? You have title that's being held in the LLC, but you have the financing tied to that property as the individual. Any lawyer worth their salt, if they see that, right? Say you have the tenant slip and fall, you think you're covered because you have the LLC. All good, I'll have the LLC. If the lawyer pulls up the records and they see, okay, cool, this person's being held in the LLC, they'll dig a little bit deeper though, Mike. They'll see, oh, actually, the financing is in this person's name. Then the corporate veil can be pierced. That's a term that you'll hear a lot. If a lawyer can pierce the corporate veil, that means they're just invalidating the fact that this is an LLC. They're calling foul play. If the corporate veil is pierced, all the protection that you thought you had from a liability perspective is gone, right? So I urge you, and if you're a lawyer listening to this or watching this on YouTube and you want to correct me, that's fine. But my understanding is that you cannot hold title in an LLC and get the financing in your personal name because that invalidates the LLC. So if you're not even going about it the right way, because you're trying to get the best of both worlds, you're trying to get the liability protection and you're trying to get the best financing terms, then I think you're as exposed as if you just never went about it in the first place. Anything to kind of add onto that, Mike?
It can get very, very complicated because you can have people that would buy the property in their name and then to get the financing, and then they'll transfer the ownership to the LLC after that. And then that complicates your title insurance policy that you have. And so it gets really, really muddy. So my advice to people when they call me up and say, hey, I want to invest in, Cleveland real estate. And I ask them like, hey, do you have any experience? And they tell me no. My first inclination is always to tell them to consult with a CPA and an attorney to figure out how they want to pursue the properties. And then also too, depending on their financing, right? In your case, when you bought the properties with us, you were high income earning individual, you could qualify conventionally, and that would get you the best financing terms, right? To go conventional is always going to get you the 30-year fixed rate debt. It's going to get you the best rates. It's going to get you the best fees and points and everything that goes along with it. When you have more complicated tax and you had, clean tax returns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you're self-employed like myself, it's a little bit more difficult to get the financing pieces, set up. So oftentimes, I use DSCR type financing. I'm willing to pay more fees and points for that, for the ease of the financing piece of it. So, those are other small nuances that we have to take into consideration when you're acquiring the properties.
That's a great point, Mike. And we'll kind of bottom line this. This is going to be a quicker episode today, but we'll bottom line this. The reason I don't like the question, should I invest in rental properties using an LLC, is that it just kind of misses the point entirely. You just need to start, right? You just need to start. You just need to pull the trigger. You just need to buy the property, and adding this little layer of should I do the LLC or not, it's just another roadblock. It's just another kind of excuse, or like, oh, well, I got to set up the LLC and things like that. And it's just like, you don't need to do that. And that's what I don't like about it, is that it's hard enough to bring yourself as a rookie investor mentally to the table to invest. It's hard enough to do that. You start adding in the, oh, do I have to get an LLC? And then like, oh, is the LLC supposed to be in the state that the property is being purchased in? Or should I set it up in a state where I have anonymity like Nevada or Wyoming or whatever? And then you just go down this rabbit hole. And then what? You never buy the rental property, right? You never buy the rental property. And then on top, so that's what I don't like about it. At the end of the day, it's like, if you want to do that, that's your prerogative. That's great. But if you're just a rookie, like, that's an advanced tactic, Mike. That's an advanced tactic. It should be considered an advanced tactic. Don't stress about that if you're getting your first rental property.
It's funny you mentioned it. I was actually going to say this, but I had somebody one time contact me, had never bought a property, not even their own personal residence, but they had gone through the exercise of setting up a Wyoming LLC holding company. They had set up a Ohio LLC, and the Wyoming LLC owned the Ohio LLC. Right. And I don't know if they ever did buy a property. They never bought a property with me.
Yeah. So. And that's what I'm saying, is that it's just like, if you want to be a real estate investor, buy a house. Setting up the LLC, setting up your website or whatever, setting up all that stuff, that's not real estate investing. That's not it. You got to buy the property. You got to analyze it, operate it, run it, manage it. That's being a real estate investor, not setting up the LLC. And so that's it at the end of the day, folks. Like, I don't think that you need to stress yourself out. And this is coming from someone that went down this rabbit hole myself. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to buy the properties first. And that's what I've done. That's still what I do. I do not see a need at this point in time to own my properties in an LLC. Well, might that change later on down the road? Sure, maybe. Maybe I might find the need and the utility to shift title over and shift my financing over and things like that. That might come down later on down the road, but I didn't let that stop me from just getting started. And so that's what I just really don't like about the LLC question, is it just stops a lot of people from getting started. On top of that too, Mike, it's a little bit more complex in that, and it's a little bit of an annoyance, because in California, for example, each LLC that you have to pay $800. Regardless if that LLC is making money or not, you have to pay a fee if you live in California and you have an LLC. And that's just a little bit annoying. It complicates your taxes as well because you'll have to file taxes for that LLC and things like that as well. So it just complicates things. And real estate investing is, hard enough. So don't make it any harder with things that you don't have to do. And again, this is not me, and we're two dudes with a podcast. We're not saying don't set up an LLC. We're just saying why you may or why you may not, and why for most people, especially rookie investors, they probably don't need to set up the LLC. Just make sure you have the right insurance. And to clarify as well, Mike, this is residential rental properties, right? So 1 to 4 units. When you're in the world of commercial, it's a whole other animal entirely. If you're in commercial, 5 units and above, you're going to have to get a commercial loan anyway, right? You're going to have to get a commercial loan anyway. And when you're dealing with commercial and you're dealing with commercial financing, then yes, set it up and buy it as an LLC. There's more complexity. There's more risk in commercial. You're already getting commercial financing, commercial insurance. So set it up, buy the commercial properties in an LLC. But when you're talking about a single family house, a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex even, you probably don't need to own it in an LLC. So that's kind of my take. Let us know in the comments or, message us if you kind of vehemently disagree. That's really funny. When I have conversations with people, I get very visceral reactions from people to be like, no, like you're exposing yourself to all this risk and you're doing it the wrong way and you're like giving people the wrong advice. I'm like, look, I'm not telling you one way or another what to do. I'm telling you what I do. I'm telling you what I think. And that's fine. Everyone can have their opinion in real estate investing. We're sharing ours. But any closing thoughts, Mike?
This topic does not need to make it so complicated for people. And, as somebody who works with investors and interviews and consults with potentially new investors, this is a topic of conversation that I have every single week. And I think people make it way, way, way more complicated than it needs to be. And, my advice is just buy a property. The best teacher is doing a deal, and we can figure out the rest, right? And maybe even for a future episode, I'll have to hit up one of my local attorneys here in Cleveland and see if we could do a follow-up episode and bring him on and get his take on all of this. So
yeah, that would be interesting because I think that a lot of the podcast episodes and YouTube videos with attorneys, they're all kind of doom and gloom, and they're like, you got to set up the LLC, you got to set up the LLC. I think that's what like a lot of that fear is what drives people to think that this is it. And all I'm saying is like, don't just accept what's being said necessarily, right? They're like, everyone just is like, oh, I just got to do this. But think critically about the reasons why, and then, make the decision that's right for you. But at the end of the day, like Mike said, just get started. Just get started and don't overcomplicate the situation. But yeah, so anyway, that's the episode for today, folks. I hope you found it helpful. If you thought it was helpful, consider giving Mike and I and the Financial Freedom Fighters podcast a 5-star rating wherever you listen to the podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. If you have questions about real estate investing, you want to reach out to me, you can find me on all socials at Cashflow Saga. If you want to hit up Mike for any questions or learn about the Cleveland real estate market, you can find him at Realtor Michael Magno. We are the Financial Freedom Fighters podcast. We will see you in the next episode. Peace.
See ya.